So we're going to do some Bible stories. I hope you've been looking forward to this. Some of them you're going to know, and some of them you might not know, and some of them you might just find out some things that you never thought about before. Today's story is going to be about David and Goliath. Do you know that one? David was just a young boy, and he was fighting against Goliath, who was a giant. But we're going to read about that. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel 16 and 17. So it's kind of in the first little bit of your Bible. See that? Okay, so if you can find that, maybe you can read that later, but I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to kind of shorten it up. I'm not going to read the entire thing because it will take a long time. So the Lord said to Samuel, I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of Jesse's sons to be king. So the Lord wanted him to go. There's going to be somebody to be king. That's exciting. And so God already had somebody picked out. And we never know who God is going to pick for a job. It's not always who you're going to think. So when they arrived, they started bringing out, starting with the oldest. Now, there was 8 boys. And so they brought out the oldest one, and Samuel waited for God to tell him, is this the one? But it was not the one. So then he brought out the second oldest, and he said, is this the one? And he's not the one. And he brought out one after another. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, are these all the sons you have? Well, they're still the youngest, Jesse answered, but he's tending the sheep. Samuel said, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. This kind of reminds me of the story of Cinderella. And the prince is coming to look for Cinderella. And the stepmother brings out the 2 of her daughters and said, pick this one. But the glass slipper didn't fit. And this time, Samuel was not trying a glass slipper on these boys. He was trying on the presence of God on these boys. And he said, God, does this fit what you're looking for? It wasn't a shoe that needed to fit. It was God's approval that needed to fit. And he said, is this who you asked for? And God said, no. Is this who you asked for? Said, no. Now in the story of Cinderella, the prince said, are these all your daughters? Are these all the women that live in your house? And they said, oh, no, but the other one is not important. You would not want that one. And it's kind of what Jesse said. Well, these are my older boys. These are the ones that you would want to be king, because the other guy is just a little guy and not that important. So much like Cinderella. But he said, go and get him. And so he did. And just like in Cinderella, they tried on and the presence of God and said, does this fit? And it was a perfect fit. And God said, this is the one. This is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. So the Spirit of God was on David in power. He was powerful. Isn't that amazing? What do you think the older brothers were thinking? He did that all in front of the older brothers. Now you saw the story of Cinderella. Were the stepsisters very happy with that? They were not. And I don't imagine that David's brothers were very happy either, that they didn't get picked to be king. They were probably pretty jealous. It doesn't say so, but we'll read some things later that will give us a hint of that. Now, usually, the older kids are chosen for stuff. I don't know how many kids are in your family, but if you have a bigger family, the older one often gets picked, don't they? If there's somebody who gets to do something, quite often the older one gets chosen to do that. But that's sometimes a good thing, and it's sometimes a bad thing, because when they also want a job done, they will usually pick the older one as well. So it's good or bad, but the older one quite often gets picked. So we just think that they know more, they have more experience, they can deal with it better. But the one that needs to be picked is the one that God chooses. And it might not be who you expect. Okay, so let's get back to this. Now there was a king already. So David was picked to be king, but not yet. They were just when it's time. So not right now. You know how sometimes you have to wait for things. And so it wasn't time for him to be king, just when it was time that he would be. So the king then was called Saul. Now, Saul kind of would get upset at times. And one of his servants said, because he was looking for ways to settle down, looking for ways to calm down. And he said, I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the harp. He's a brave man and a warrior, and he speaks well, and the Lord is with him. And so Saul sent to Jesse's house and said, send me your son David, who is with the sheep. And so Jesse sent David to Saul. And so David would play the harp for him, and it would calm him down. It would make him feel better. And Saul said, I want David to stay in my service because I'm pleased with him. So I want David to work for me because this is working good. So David would go back and forth. Sometimes he would be working for Saul, and sometimes he would be working as a shepherd still, working for his dad, taking care of the sheep. And so he kind of split his time. So sometimes with Saul and sometimes at home. All right, so now comes the part of the story where the war happens. There was a group of people called the Philistines, and they gathered their forces for war, and they assembled, they got all together, and they pitched a camp. And Saul and the Israelites, they pitched their camp, and they drew their battle line to meet the Philistines. And the Philistines occupied one hill, and the Israelites another, with the valley between. So there was a big hill here, and the Philistines were here, and there was a big hill over here, and the Israelites were over here, and there was a big valley in between. Maybe you have driven to Lethbridge, and you know how you go down into it, and there's a hills on either side, and then the road goes right in between. So it's kind of like that. And one army was way up on one hill, and one army was way up on the other hill. So there was a champion named Goliath, who was one of the Philistines, and he was over 9 feet tall. Do you know how tall 9 feet is? You guys probably do it in meters and centimeters. Well, my bedroom ceiling is 8 feet tall. So if Goliath stood in my bedroom, his head would go right through the ceiling and stick out by about this much. That is pretty tall. That is taller than anybody I have ever met. That is huge. And remember how old David was? It doesn't say how old he was, but he was the very youngest of the brothers. And it said that he was just a young boy. So I don't know how old he was. But he was not 9 feet tall. So he was over 9 feet tall, and he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze that weighed, it says, 5,000 shekels. Now, that would be about 125 pounds, about 57 kilograms. That's pretty heavy. It's about the same weight as one of the kids at high school, one of the older kids at high school. Can you imagine? That was just his coat of armor. That wasn't his helmet or his boots or anything else. Just the coat of armor that he wore over his body weighed as much as a high school kid. Can you imagine how heavy that was? Oh my goodness. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, which is like a protection thing, and a bronze javelin was strung on his back. Do you know what a javelin is? Maybe you've done that at track meet days, what is that called? Yeah, I guess track meet days. And it's like a great big spear that you throw, great big long handle. That's a javelin. And the spear shaft and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. That's like 15 kilograms. That is heavy, heavy, heavy. Is that 15 kilograms or 15 pounds? Anyway, it was very heavy. I would have to look that up. Oh, let me look that up. I think it says in here, 15 pounds, about 7 kilograms. I want to tell you the right thing. Can you imagine how heavy that is? So Goliath stood and he shouted to the Israelites, "Why don't you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you are servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects, and you will serve us." Now that was the plan. Instead of everybody fighting, he says, you send your best guy, and I am our best guy, and we'll see who wins. Only one person has to fight. Sounds like a good idea. Probably better than everybody fighting, right? It says, "Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. My goodness, if you had to fight a guy that was 9 feet tall, and it said he was a champion, which means that he's won so many fights, would you want to fight a champion that was 9 feet tall? So they were scared of him, and they didn't want to fight. So now, here comes David. And remember that David had 7 brothers. Now 3 of the oldest sons had gone into the war with Saul. So his oldest brothers were there fighting. Well, not fighting, waiting to fight, lined up. So for 40 days, the Philistines, Goliath, came forward every morning and every night and took his stand and said, "Come on, everybody fight me, come on." 40 days is a long time. And so far, there was no fighting. There was just a whole lot of yelling. And just saying, "Come on, let's do this." But there was nobody brave enough to do that yet. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this food, this 10 loaves of bread and some grain, and take it to your brothers and hurry to their camp. And take along some cheese to their commander and see how your brothers are doing and bring back some assurance from them, because they are in this war." So early in the morning, David left his flock of sheep with a shepherd, and he headed out to the war. And he reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. And the Israelites and the Philistines were on their hills, drawing up their lines. Now David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills Goliath?" Because Goliath was yelling his usual thing, Come on, if anybody's brave enough, let's fight. And they said to him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. Let me see. I lost my spot here. The king will give him great wealth, and he will also give him his daughter in marriage, and his father's family won't have to pay any taxes. Well, that sounds like a good deal. Now David's oldest brother heard him speaking, and he said, why have you come down here? Who did you leave those sheep with? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now this is why I think that the brothers were jealous. It's because he was not happy to see David. David brought him food and stuff, and he said he was conceited, and he probably thought he was conceited because he was picked to be king. So you think you're better than us. So he was not very happy to see him. And he wasn't looking out to protect him either. If your little brother came out onto the front lines of a war, wouldn't you say, oh, thanks for getting me my stuff, but you better go home where it's safe? But they didn't say that either. That's why I think they were jealous. And I might be wrong, but I think that they were not very happy with him. And David said, now what have I done? Can't I even speak? Have you ever felt like that? It feels like you get in trouble when you didn't even do anything yet. And then he turned away to someone else and talked with him. And he said, I want to go to Saul. And so he went to Saul, the king, and said, let no one lose heart on account of Goliath. I will go and fight him. And Saul said, you're not able to go out against him and fight him. You're only a boy. And Goliath has been fighting since he was young. But David said, I have been keeping my father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it and struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. My goodness, that is brave. He would hit it with a big stick. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. I have been killing both the lion and the bear. And this Goliath will be just like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. He said, God has saved me every time, and God is going to save me again. Now remember that it said, way back then it said, from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Now Saul must have understood this, or maybe he just wanted somebody to fight and get this over with, because he said to David, go and the Lord be with you. So I think he did understand. Because if he thought David was going to lose, that meant he would be a slave to Goliath and his army. So it sounds like he understood, go and the Lord be with you, because he knew that God was real. So then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head, and David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. Now, do you remember how much that stuff weighed? It was probably a little bit smaller, maybe a lot smaller than Goliath's, but it was still so heavy. Remember, Goliath weighed the same as a kid from the high school. So Saul's would have still been so heavy. I don't know if you've ever gone to the fire station, because sometimes they let you try on the stuff. And just the stuff that the firemen have to wear, the heavy boots and all the fire protective overalls and stuff, I've put that on before and I could hardly move because it was so heavy. And this was even heavier. And David said, I cannot go in these. I'm not used to them. And so he took them off. And he took his staff. His staff is kind of like a cane without a hook on it. He took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and he put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag with his sling in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. I don't know if you know what a sling is. It's different than a slingshot. A slingshot has 2 little pieces up with a rubber and a handle, and you hold it. A sling is kind of the same idea because it throws a stone, but it's more like a piece of material, and you whip it around like this, and when you go like that, the stone will shoot. Way harder to use. You have to be really good at that, because a slingshot, you can kind of aim it. I don't know how you aim a sling, but apparently you can, because David was quite good at it. But anyway, meanwhile, Goliath, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, and he hated him. And he said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Because he noticed his staff in his hand. He didn't have a great big spear. He didn't have a bow and arrow. He didn't have the weapons that they usually have. And the Philistine cursed David and by his gods and said, "Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." I'm gonna kill you and let the animals eat you. I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And David said to him, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Who do you think is stronger? Goliath's sword or God? I know you got that right. "This day," David said, "the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give your carcass to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." That's really true. It's not always who's bigger or who has the better weapons or who deserves something more or who has the most money. God doesn't measure things the way that we measure things. God is the one that saves. He saves us for eternity. He saves us from trouble. He is the one. So as Goliath moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. This surprises me. He wasn't even ready. If I was out there, and I would not want to be out there, I would already have my rock in my sling. I would be ready to fight. But he ran quickly, and he reached into his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it. And he struck Goliath on the forehead. Can you imagine? It had to be God that was doing this, because it's hard to aim something and hit it, especially for me, because I'm not a very good aim. But he was running against an enemy, running and doing this at the same time, and he still hit him. I don't think I could do it if I was holding still and knew how to use the sling. Anyway, he hit Goliath on the forehead with the stone, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over Goliath with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. It's a little bit hard of a story because it's about killing. But the point of it is that if God is with you, who can be against you? We talked about that before. David wasn't afraid because he knew that God was sending him to do this. And if God sends you on a job, then God helps you with the job. And it's not about how old you are, how big you are, or anything else. It's about who God says you are. You're a warrior for him. So you need to be who you are and not who people think you should be. Saul thought that David needed to wear all that armor, but did he? No, he was not Saul. He was not a big warrior. His brothers thought that he should stay home and play his harp and babysit the sheep. But is that what God wanted him to do? No. They thought he was just too little to be good for anything. But we are already good for something. We're good for so many things. Because that's what God says. We can do amazing things. So I want you to remember, we talked about this before. Remember who you are and whose you are. Can you remember that? Awesome. So we are going to do a craft today. And I'm not going to make a sling because that's hard. We're going to make a slingshot. And don't worry, mums and dads, this is not going to take out your window or anything else. We're going to make it out of paper. And it shoots paper bullets. So we are going to take 5 sheets of paper. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to put them all together like this and lay them in front of you. Now I'm going to measure. Oh, I don't have a pen with me. That's okay. I'm going to measure 2 centimeters. And I'm going to fold it about, well, I'm going to guess at mine because I didn't bring a pen to do this. I'm going to fold up one edge 2 centimeters. Excuse me. So that's pretty easy so far, eh? Do you think you could make a slingshot out of paper that would work? I didn't think so. I didn't think it would be strong enough. But then again, everybody thought that David wouldn't be strong enough. So you folded it over. Now we're going to fold it on that same fold 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to look like this. Now, sorry, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to make a little snip, just a couple centimeters down this side, right at the fold. And I'm going to do it on this side, just a couple centimeters. Okay, see that? Just a little bit. Now I have a big elastic and I am going to put it in that cut. And I'm going to pull it way down and put it in the other cut. So it's going to be like this. Okay? Now I'm going to fold it over one more time. And then I'm going to cut right along that fold. So the elastic is at the back. And I'm going to cut off the extra paper that's sticking out. Okay? There we go. That's pretty easy, eh? Now I'm going to take a piece of tape. I want some nice strong tape. So I'm using packing tape. I just like packing tape. So strong. And I'm going to cut it in half so it's a little bit stronger, skinnier. So I am going to take the tape and I'm going to wrap it around the end so it doesn't come apart on me. Okay? Got it. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. Don't cover up the elastic. Oh my goodness. This tape is crazy. That does not look like a slingshot yet, does it? Okay. So now we've got that done. Now we're going to take our paper. This is the hard part. And we're going to fold it in half. Like that. And squish it, squish it, squish it. You might have to stand on it to squish it. So it looks like this. Is that looking more like a slingshot now? It is, isn't it? Okay. So now we're going to take a piece of packing tape and we're going to wrap it around the handle. take a piece like this and wrap it around so it stays like a handle. And then we're going to take these pieces and bend them down like that. And bend the other side down like that. Squish, squish, squish. So now it's like a Y. See that? That is our slingshot. Now I'm going to show you how to make bullets. I'm going to use this colored paper. So I'm going to cut off, this is from our leftover, I'll use this because this is our leftover piece. So I'm going to cut off a piece, I don't know, maybe about 2.5 centimeters. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm just going to fold it a little bit and over and over and over again. So it makes just a little thing like this. And then we fold it in half. Okay? Now when you fold it in half, we hook the fold over the elastic and you pull it back. There you go. You want to see that again? So it's just paper, so it's not going to make a mess. And I tried it out to see if it hurt. And I was shooting it at my big dog from far away. And he did not even wake up. So don't worry, parents, it doesn't hurt. Still don't point it at somebody's eyes. Okay, so we take our little piece of paper and we pull it back. There you go. How cool is that? We made it out of nothing, and it's something that's not going to hurt. So you can see how good your aim is. And you can put a hole in a piece of cardboard and hang it up, see if you can get it through the hole. Just have fun with that. Maybe you could have a little war with your brother or your sister and make a whole bunch of little bullets and have fun with that. So that is our story, and that is our craft. And now I have a song. It's going to be way different. Jenna picked it out for us. It's a rap song, and it's about David and Goliath. And so I hope you enjoy that as well, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Goliath was a giant soldier from Gath. Those that he stood against would be squashed in his path. He was big, he was mean, he'd make other soldiers scream. The Israelites were all frightened by him, except this young boy David, who believed in God. He'd never been to war and didn't appear too tough. He was small, he was brave, he knew in God he'd be saved. God was the only protection needed. With a little faith, the young boy could do anything. With his trust in God, he knew he had protection. With a little faith, he'd face big bad Goliath, and in God's trust he was safe. So off David went to fight Goliath to the end. All it took was a slingshot and a small piece of rock. Goliath began to laugh at the boy in his path. He cursed him and he called him names. But David stood his ground, threw his rock with his slingshot. It struck Goliath in the head and he began to drop. It made a mighty sound as he fell to the ground. With God's help, David had won. With a little faith, the young boy could do anything. With his trust in God, he knew he had protection. With a little faith, he'd face big bad Goliath, and in God's hand